In 10th grade, my French teacher walked into our classroom and announced that we had a French speaking test on Monday. Let me tell you one thing. French is a truly beautiful language. I especially love how words like creme brulee and macaron just roll off of my tongue and into my belly. It's beautiful and delicious. But there was a tiny issue. I couldn't speak French to save my life. And naturally, when I heard her say we had a test, I panicked. I went home and did the only thing I could think of: cram. I looked through all my notes, I tried to memorize everything, and I pulled multiple all-nighters before the test. And to be honest, I was overwhelmed, but I seriously thought it would work. But it didn't, and I didn't do so great on the test. And I was upset, but I wasn't upset about the grade I had received on the test, but rather on the fact that my studying technique, my last-minute studying technique had not helped me. Cramming, everybody's go-to last-minute studying technique, had failed me, and I couldn't understand why. If everyone did it, then why didn't it work? And I was curious, but soon I found out that when you're cramming, you're simply training your mind to repeat a set of information over and over again. Essentially, you're copy-pasting that. And when you're copy-pasting something, you're not making connections to that piece of information. And that's where the problem is, not making connections. Because making connections is the best way to learn something and being able to remember something for a long term. And when we're not making connections, we can't remember it. Also, when you're cramming, you're shoving so much information into your brain that you're placing so much stress, and your anxiety and frustration levels just increase. And that's exactly what's keeping you from being able to learn and remember what you learned. And so, my dear friends, our favorite studying technique, aka cramming, will never ever help us learn. Now you might be wondering, if cramming doesn't work, what does? What helps us learn the best? And I was curious. And so I turned to my trusted advisor, Google, for some help. And during my research process, I came across one word that changed my entire perspective on learning: metacognition. What is it? Let's split the word up. Meta is a reference to oneself, and cognition is the process through which we gain knowledge through our thoughts, experiences, and senses. And when we put them together, metacognition means being aware of one's own thought processes and through which we learn. In a sense, thinking about our thinking. Now, how is metacognition efficient? Why is it better than cramming? Well, oftentimes, when we want to understand something, we simply study it, right? Except that's not helping us. You see, over time, studying has just become a repetitive habit that we all do in order to pass assessments. And that's not what studying should be about. Studying should be about remembering what you learned, making connections, and truly understanding it. But that's not studying. That's something completely different. That's learning. Learning is being able to remember what you learned for a long amount of time, making connections, truly understanding it, and in the end, being able to create your own concepts and evolving your knowledge. That's learning. And metacognition, metacognitive thinking, can help us learn. Because when you use metacognition, you start to think about your way of thinking, and you realize how you learn and how you think and how you should think to better your learning. Metacognition can be thought of as a cycle, the metacognitive cycle. In fact, I have an acronym to help you guys remember the cycle. SPADE, like the spade of aces. And if you want to ace your learning, you use SPADE. SPADE stands for spot, plan, assess, adapt, and evolve. Now, you might be wondering, adapt doesn't belong there because it doesn't start with a D. Well, you're just going to have to adapt to the fact that it doesn't start with a D. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into this SPADE. Spade, S, spot. Spot your task. Identify this concept that you want to learn or this problem that you want to solve. And this can be anything. How to drive a car, how to play chess, or how to do PEMDAS. Next, plan. To me, this is the second most important part of Spade because this is where you choose to learn instead of study. This is where you choose the right path to learning something. Planning. In order to start off planning, there's one thing we all have to do. Put away distractions. And I'm pretty sure we're all guilty of doing this. Looking at the Office memes or watching YouTube videos on how to dress your cat up for Halloween, especially when you don't even have a cat, is first of all a bit concerning, but second, it's not the best way to start learning. So do away with all your distractions. Then, identify your strengths and weaknesses. What are things you know and what are things you don't know? Because now, once you recognize these things, you're not wasting time trying to relearn things that you already know. Next step of planning is to implement your strategies. We all learn every day. We all learn different things, and we all learn them in different ways. And so these strategies that we use to help us learn will be different for everyone. But I've got 3 strategies that are fail-proof and will help you learn anything that you want to learn. And they are spaced repetition, Feynman's technique, and experiential learning. Let's start with spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is simply the process of using flashcards to learn something over a long period of time. Now, this might seem like repeating it, and in some sense you are, but the key difference here is that you're learning this over a long span of time. Because when you're cramming, you're either learning everything and shoving all information in an hour or 5 minutes. But when you spread it out over weeks or even days of learning, you're able to remember this more. According to Hermann Ebbinghaus, a renowned psychologist who's known for his work on memory, has said that 60% of what we learn, we forget in 20 minutes. That's it. 20 minutes is all it takes to forget more than 50% of what you just learned. With such fickle memory, we have to implement strategies that then will help us remember something for a long time, because if we don't remember it, we haven't learned it. The second strategy, Feynman's technique, was developed by Richard P. Feynman, a physicist who won the Nobel Prize for this technique. And when you know he won a Nobel Prize for this, you know the technique has to work. Feynman's technique is the process of teaching someone else the concept that you have learned in the simplest language possible. It's being able to teach a peer and help them through their mistakes and questions and bring them to the place that you are right now. This ensures that you know the material in a deep enough way that you're able to teach someone else from the beginning. That's Feynman's technique. Last but not least is experiential learning. Experience, as we all know it, is an important way that we learn in lives. And we have to use this to our benefit. Experiential learning can look different for different people based on what we want to learn, but it can be seen in 2 common ways. 1, you're observing someone else do this task that you want to learn. And 2, you're doing the task yourself. That's experiential learning. You're getting hands-on, you're experiencing it. For example, if you wanted to learn how to paint a tree, then you would watch someone else, a little bit more experienced, paint a tree. Then you would take notes on their strategies. Then you would paint the tree on your own. That's experiential learning. And these 3 strategies will always help you learn anything you want to learn in the most efficient way possible. The next part of Spade is to assess. Assess yourself. Test yourself over these concepts that you're learning. This is important because this is how you know your progression. Because also, this is important because assessing helps you bring over to the next part of spade, adapt. Adapt, to me, is the most important part of spade. Adapting, we're changing the way we're thinking. We're molding the way we're thinking to become better learners. This is where we collect data from our assessments on questions we got right and we got wrong. Then we look a little deeper into the questions we got wrong. Why did we get them wrong? When we first looked at that question, what did we think of? How did you approach that question? How did you break it down? And then you should think, how was I supposed to have approached that question? How should I have broken it down? And how should I have answered it? This is the most important part because this is where metacognition plays the biggest role. You're thinking about your thinking. This is where you're changing your thinking to make yourself the better learner. This reflective part of the cycle is where you realize and your ways of thinking, and you're able to improve your critical thinking skills and thus become the better thinker and then become the better learner. And soon, once you go through the metacognitive cycle and spade, your knowledge of this concept will grow. It'll evolve over time, and that's the goal, isn't it? To understand that concept, to be able to remember it, to be able to create and evolve from it. Now let's put spade into action, shall we? A few years ago, I started learning how to play the violin. You know how it is in the beginning. Your kid comes home and he or she is like, "Mom and Dad, I saw this awesome thing at school and I want to learn how to play the violin." And you think, "Oh my God, I thought the days of losing sleep over this child was over. Now this?" But then you agree. And the playing starts. That was the same thing that happened in my house. And soon, once I started playing, I was ready for my biggest, hardest song ever. Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars, and Don't Laugh. This was a serious task. So, I used spade. I first spotted my task, which was to learn the song, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Stars, on the violin. Then I planned. I first recognized my strengths and weaknesses. What did I already know and what I didn't know? Then I used my strategies. I used spaced repetition to learn the notes, to learn the rhythms and the finger patterns on the violin. Then I used experiential learning to watch someone a little bit more experienced play the song on their violin. And I took notes on their strategies like vibrato and finger placement. And then I played it myself. And soon I assessed myself. I had my violin teacher look over me and tell me what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. Then I took everything together and I learned to become the better violinist. I knew what I was doing and I knew what I had to do to make my song sound better. And I evolved my learning. I became a better violinist. In our current world, it's not enough to just study something anymore. We have to learn the why and the what, the why and the how behind everything, because the what is not important. In order to better ourselves and our community, we must learn to connect the concepts and that we learn and connect and create new concepts to better our world. In order to do this, we must learn, and we must learn right. So the next time you're learning how to play chess or how to do a backhand serve, use spade. Think about spade. Spot, plan, assess, adapt, and evolve. Because now is the time for you to own your learning. Thank you.